Mr. President, we would like to once again record our fundamental disagreement with the President's approach to inviting delegations to today's meeting under Rules 37 and 39. In addition to Ukraine, there are as many as 5 of them, and all of them are members or allies of NATO and the EU. Each time, these delegations spend at least half an hour of valuable, and in the context of the UN's budget deficit in the literal sense of the word, the Council's time to read out the same theses, with zero added value and almost identical to the speech of the EU representative. This is an unacceptable situation, the responsibility for which lies entirely with the chairmanship. It is obvious that European countries occupying the chair of the Security Council are simply not able to put the tasks of impartial leadership of the Council above bloc solidarity. That undermines the credibility of the Council and devalues the value of its deliberations. But we expect that European delegations, especially the main sponsors of the Kiev regime's pumping with weapons, will request to speak at the Security Council tomorrow, at the briefing we requested on the topic of European attempts to impede the peace process around Ukraine. We have a lot of questions for them, and we are waiting for answers. But there are serious doubts that the EU will find the courage to come and provide these answers, not in the format of a staged and comfortable EU-NATO get-together according to the blanks agreed in Brussels, but, as the discussion in the Security Council suggests, in the mode of an interactive discussion in full view of the entire international community. Our former European partners, who have long lost their strategic sovereignty, are simply not capable of this. Mr. President, the scenario of today's meeting is absolutely clear and predictable. Like previous similar initiatives of our Western and recently European colleagues, it is not being convened in order to solve problems and bring the Ukrainian crisis closer to a peaceful solution. Its task is to prevent the image of supposedly free and democratic Ukraine, a victim of the so-called Russian aggression, which the European sponsors of the Kiev regime have been trying to keep afloat for several years, having begun to form it long before the start of Russia's NWO in Ukraine. It is becoming more and more difficult for London, Paris, Berlin, and their satellites to inflate this propaganda bubble. The dictatorship established in Kiev and the desire of the Kiev overdue prince to stay in power at any cost, which he will lose with the onset of peace, are too obvious. His main fear is the elections, in which he and his henchmen will have to answer for the failure to fulfill promises of peace with Russia, the protection of the rights of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, respect for the rights and freedoms of everyone in the country, which he has turned into a concentration camp and a meat grinder. In addition, as long as the bogeyman of the Russian threat exists, the Zelensky clique may not report on the embezzled budget money and Western, primarily American aid, which is already counting in tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. His accomplices from Europe and the Biden administration, who have also pretty much warmed their hands on the Ukrainian conflict, do not want the same thing. Therefore, the main task of this handful of militarists is to prevent the main shareholder, the United States, from withdrawing from the Ukraine anti-Russia geopolitical project and prolonging the war as long as possible. This is not easy, as the new American administration has opened its eyes over the past few months regarding the true face of the Zelensky regime and the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict. Therefore, any provocations, any lies about Russia, its actions and plans are used. And today we in this hall are invited to believe that Russia is deliberately shelling residential areas of Ukrainian cities, passing off as evidence the consequences of the work of Ukrainian air defense deployed near houses and social facilities in violation of the elementary norms of IHL. At the same time, they hush up the fact that the targets of our strikes are exclusively objects associated with the military-industrial complex of Ukraine, which are successfully destroyed and disabled. In recent days alone, ammunition depots, military technical equipment in the Dnipropetrovsk region, a temporary deployment point, and a warehouse of rocket and artillery weapons of the Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the Sumy region, as well as a temporary deployment point of foreign mercenaries in the area of the settlement of Svyatogorsk of the DPR and in the Kharkiv region, have been hit. A blow was struck at an enterprise of the defense industry of Ukraine, Pavlograd Chemical Plant, Dnipropetrovsk region. 2 launchers of the Patriot anti-aircraft missile system were destroyed. A group rocket attack was carried out at the unloading site, and a warehouse with military equipment and ammunition in the port of Odessa. It led to the destruction of about 100 containers containing important components for unmanned boats, unmanned aerial vehicles, and ammunition. In addition, the fact that Russia is carrying out these actions as a retaliatory measure in connection with the massive and targeted shelling of peaceful Russian cities by the Kiev regime is also hushed up. So, despite the 72-hour truce announced by Russia on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory over fascism, from May 8 to May 11th, more than 14,000 violations were recorded, over 4,000 shelling from cannon artillery, tanks and mortars, 62 with the use of MLRS, 9,900 strikes and drops of ammunition from UAVs. 5 attempts to break through the state border of Russia in the Belgorod and Kursk regions, 37 attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine have been established. During these 3 days of aggression from the Banderates, 6 peaceful Russians were killed, at least 17 were injured. It is symptomatic that the Kiev regime unleashed the most massive drone attacks on civilian targets in a number of Russian cities remote from the front line, including Moscow, after the outlined progress on the peaceful track. Namely, after the resumption of direct Russian-Ukrainian negotiations in Istanbul set the benchmarks for agreements to end the conflict. From 20:00 on May 20th to 08:00 on May 27th, 23:31, attack unmanned aerial vehicles launched from Ukraine were destroyed and intercepted, including 1465 outside the zone of the special military operation. Unfortunately, as a result, there are injured and dead civilians, including women and children. On May 22nd, as a result of an attack on the village of Panteleimonovka in the DPR, 8 people were injured. On the same day, in the Vassilievsky municipal district of the Zaporozhye region, a girl born in 1990 was killed, and 4 children were injured as a result of drone strikes. The armed forces of Ukraine also launched 2 strikes with HIMARS missiles on civilian targets in the city of Lvov, Kursk region, where 16 people were injured, including 2 children. Mr. President, the plans of Zelensky and his accomplices, as they say, are sewn with white threads. Their task is to deceive and disorient U.S. President Donald Trump, who is taking decisive steps towards peace, and to try at all costs to return his country, which has already wasted hundreds of billions of dollars to help Ukraine, to anti-Russian and Russophobic positions. We will analyze in detail their methods and tactics to undermine the peace efforts of the leaders of Russia, the United States, and a number of other regional mediators at tomorrow's meeting, which we deliberately requested on this topic, so we will not dwell on it now. I will only say that it is becoming more and more difficult to promote Ukrainian and Western lies about Russia, since the real actions of the Kiev regime, its conscious choice in favor of war and further suffering of the citizens of their country, speak louder than any words. Just as the peace initiatives and concrete steps of the Russian leadership are absolutely clear and obvious. We intend to continue acting in this way and are determined to continue the serious direct negotiation process with Ukraine, which it interrupted in April 2022 at the instigation of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Russophobic associates. It must result in a solution that reliably addresses the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict and the threats to our country's security emanating from Ukraine. The Ukrainian side was invited to meet in Istanbul on June 2nd and discuss the content of our memorandums with approaches to the negotiation process. As long as Kiev tries to prolong the war and provoke Russia by striking at residential and civilian infrastructure on our territory, we will continue our NWO and destroy facilities related to the military potential of the Kiev regime. And no new anti-Russian sanctions, arms supplies to Ukraine, and other hostile steps towards Russia will prevent the inevitable military defeat of the Zelensky regime. The choice is now up to Ukraine. Peace based on the results of negotiations or inevitable defeat on the battlefield with different conditions for the end of the conflict. Thank you.